Hi guys, it's Rachel. Today I'm starting my course on Pompeii, the ancient city in the Bay of Naples region of Italy. This course is going to focus specifically on the city of Pompeii and also to a smaller degree Herculaneum, both cities which were devastated especially by the 79 CE eruption of Mount Vesuvius. I'm probably going to cover mostly sort of what's been uncovered in the area from archaeological digs, archaeological evidence, history of the cities and Rome at that time, and also modern conservation efforts. Today I'm going to discuss the eruption itself in 79 CE. The date of the eruption is highly debated. Some accounts say August 24th, some August 31st, which is the account that I'm going with. Some even say November, but from what we can tell based on evidence that things uncovered later at the time, it was around the end of August. As well as Pompeii and Herculaneum, the cities of Oplantis, Nuceria, and Stabiae were also affected by the eruption. Like I mentioned a second ago, Herculaneum was in the midst of the feast of the then deceased Emperor Augustus, so the sports and theater facilities were open during the time. So there were a lot of people out in the streets, a lot of people celebrating, engaged in camaraderie, so that is what makes the effects of the eruption, the fatalities of the eruption, even more devastating. The fact that there are so many people out on the streets celebrating. Prior to the eruption, Emperor Vespasian was on the throne. He ruled from 70 to 79 CE. He was venerated in Pompeii, as there's a temple built for him there, and he sponsored two major building projects in Herculaneum after the earthquake in 62 CE. The earthquake of 62 CE, in part, is why it's so hard to tell which parts of Pompeii are destroyed from what. During the time of the eruption, and prior to that, the city was undergoing reconstruction, in part because it was ravaged by this earthquake in 62 CE, which took down some buildings. So they were in a bit of a rebuilding process as it was. So it's hard to tell unless you have actual inscriptions on buildings saying this was rebuilt after the 62 CE eruption, or this was built in this year. It's hard to tell which parts of the city were devastated from the eruption and which parts from the earthquake. The eruption thrust debris more than 12 miles high into the air, which is much higher than the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980, and part of the reason why this was so devastating. 1/10 of Pompeii's population, of about approximately 20,000 people, died under the ash, asphyxiation being the most common cause of death. Contrary to some depictions in popular culture, there was no lava from the Pompeii eruption. Instead, it was what was called a pyroclastic float, which would be pummeling of pumice and ash onto the city. Lava, if that had happened, would have completely destroyed everything, and we wouldn't even have cities left to excavate. I mean, the way lava works, it really is more destructive than a pyroclastic flow because it is molten rock. And if that were the case, if lava had devastated the cities, we wouldn't have carbonized wood and door frames like we do in Herculaneum. We wouldn't have wax tablets in some part of the city also, some of which are still legible in Latin. So there was no, just so you know, there was no lava. If anyone tells you otherwise, you know they don't know what they're talking about. The first stage of the eruption was called the Plinian phase, after Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger was an eyewitness to the eruption at Pompeii. He lived there with his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who was an admiral at the navy at Misenum. Pliny the Elder went that day to try to help people who were caught in the eruption, trying to take them by boat from Misenum. He got killed by going out into the ash, while his nephew, Pliny the Younger, instead of going with his uncle, decided to finish his Latin homework that day, which was a good idea, and which is why you should always do your homework, because you can be spared from death by asphyxiation. So the Plinian phase of an eruption, which is the pumice and ash, which I talked about, is named for Pliny the Younger because he provided the first eyewitness account. He provided the first eyewitness account in history of a natural disaster, written nearly 25 years after the eruption occurred initially. The reason it's named after him, however, is because he noticed the way the cloud forms sort of an umbrella, similar to the umbrella-shaped trees in the area. The trees which are now called Plinian trees, and so it's called the Plinian phase because it makes the same shape as that umbrella tree. The eruption itself altered the topography of the Napoli region as well as the course of the river Sarno, which is a pretty big deal to completely recourse a river. Emperor Titus, who had taken over from Emperor Vespasian, was at that time, he established a relief fund for the cities affected by the eruption of Vesuvius. Neapolis, which is the modern-day Naples, was considered a disaster area. He personally visited the area, and the Roman Senate declared that the assets of the deceased were to be divided among the survivors. So there was sort of an ancient disaster relief program going on from this.